from the private sector for their ingenuity on how they could speed that project up. They've sped it up by several months now. How did they do that? For the first time ever, work on waterworks underground is being done at night. And they're lighting it up and they're doing it. And it's safe and it's effective. It's going to speed it up by several months, and it is going to be done at a cost of a few $100,000. And if you look at the cost, the real cost of having that sort of continuing chaos on Wellington Street, one of our main sort of thoroughfares through the downtown, I think it's an investment. Hours have been extended to 12 hours in many cases and to 24/7 where conditions permit. And we weren't doing that before. We're doing it with many, many contracts now. 32 projects this year, and it's saved weeks of disruption because we're working through the night or at least on a longer construction day. Lane closures to accommodate private construction projects, usually condos, are no longer automatic. I was the one that started to, we call it when you hold an agenda item and say it's not going to just go through routinely. I started to hold them because I was dissatisfied when people were just basically automatically being given 2 years where a lane would be closed on a major street to build a building. I understand that the nature of our lot configuration in Toronto is such, because we're infilling a lot of buildings, that it's difficult to do construction, but I was not prepared to accept the fact that 2 years was a required period of time. And lo and behold, when we went to negotiate these things, we found that while people still needed lanes closed for a period of time, it was a lot shorter than 2 years. It also helped that we dramatically increased the fees for closing the lanes. But that's fine. That means people focus on the bottom line, as well business should, and that they find better ways and faster ways to do this work. I also asked about 3 months ago, I said, well, could you go out? Because I've just not about to build buildings. This is just me driving around. I do think about these things because I sought the office saying I was going to try and fix it. And I noticed buildings that looked virtually finished where the lane was still closed and the hoarding was still up. And they went out and did an audit, and when they did the audit, 7 of the projects were found to be finished. In fact, they said, oh, sure, you can take that down. It's just nobody had thought to do it because the permit extended for another 3 or 4 months, but they took the hoardings down and opened the lane of traffic back up. Data has been used to identify the 10 worst intersections in the city. This data has been available for some time from a number of different sources, and we're now developing a game plan for each one. So we're changing signals. We're changing the configuration of intersections in the worst 10, and once we've fixed the worst 10, we'll go to the next 10 after that. But it's data-driven by actual data that we have of exactly what is going on with congestion. We've asked the province for permission to reintroduce photo radar in school and community safety zones. This is going to be something that will allow for the redeployment of police officers. It's not directly a traffic-related matter, though it is a safety-related matter, where we're trying at the same time to reduce the number of pedestrian deaths to 0. But, police officers are now not well deployed, in my view, when they're as highly trained as they are, and frankly as expensive as they are, sitting with radar guns, or for that matter, watching people turn left, or when they shouldn't be. And so we've asked the province for permission to use photo radar for this purpose, and I think it is a smart thing to do that will help. We've deployed police officers at some of our busiest intersections. You may have seen them, to manage pedestrians as well as traffic, because oftentimes there's so many people walking, which is a good thing, that this is causing a conflict to occur between those two groups. And this also resulted in a request that I made to the Premier, which she has agreed to create a category of people that are non-police personnel that they have. You've seen cities you've traveled to that are traffic wardens, traffic managers, whatever, but they're not, again, expensive, highly trained police officers who have other things they could be doing, but it is people, they are people who can be deployed in the downtown and elsewhere in the city to manage people and traffic better. And by the way, it's an example of 2 of those things are examples where I just think the 1867 arrangements about a big, sophisticated city like this that has a government and a population that's bigger than most of the provinces of Canada are antiquated, in that I have to go to Queen's Park, I have to ask for it, I have to convince them, and then I have to wait. For oftentimes a long time while their legislative process works its way through to get these kinds of changes that to me are just common sense and should be done, both from the standpoint of better mobility people, better safety, and better use of scarce resources when it comes to our wonderful Toronto Police Service. And so I think those arrangements should be reconsidered. You hear me talk about this often. And unless you, again, I don't want to get myself diverted because you're all hungry, but lest you think that I, in standing up for Toronto's interests, am in some way trying to pick a fight. Look, I used to get criticized regularly, including from my friends over here at the Globe and Mail, and I'm concerned they're here in such numbers today. They've even got their own table. It's very worrisome. But and I would tell them I was at a ceremony at 5:30 this morning if they think I'm making less sense than usual. But I am standing up for Toronto because I believe that, I think the way I often put it is this. I'm quite willing to have the rules apply to the City of Toronto that apply to all other cities that have 3 million people, 2 million transit riders, or just 2 million a day, 100,000 people living in its social housing, 40 million passengers plus at its airport, and so on and so forth. And the fact is there are no other cities in Ontario or Canada that are like Toronto in terms of the complexity of its challenges and the things that we have to deal with here. And I'm just saying it is past the point in time where I should have to go up the street for the smallest things to ask for permission, or to be confronted, quite frankly, by a courageous decision your City Council took overwhelmingly to agree to put road tolls on some of our roads to pay for public transit that needs to be built going forward. And we've got to be honest about the fact that when you're going to build the transit, it's not free. I think we all know that. And then to be told, after being encouraged to bring that forward, that it wasn't happening because people in other parts of the province were upset about that. I just can't accept that as being the way we can run a modern city and build the kind of city that is going to continue to attract people to our ranks and continue to attract investment here. It's not right. And I'm going to continue to stand up and fight for Toronto, and it is not anything that is personal. It's not partisan. It's not personal at all. It is just doing my job. And I'm going to keep at it in what I hope is a rational and polite way, because I think it is something where you can't give up on these kinds of things. I'll continue on just for a little bit more. We're repairing our aging transit infrastructure. We're installing an automatic train control system, and that's why the subway is closed. People, you do tend to hear from people who have, say, issues with what's going on in the city, and we've had a lot of transit closures. Why are we doing that? Because in order to install a new signal automatic control system, you can't be working in the tunnels with the wiring and all the different things that have to go on with that, and you sure want that done right when the trains are operating during the week. So we close the subway, portions of it, on weekends to get that work done. When it is done, that step in and of itself, the new train control system, will bring about a 20% increase in capacity on parts of the transit that are overstretched and over capacity now. That's how important the project is. It costs hundreds of millions of dollars, and it takes a long time. Because of the fact the work has to be done. You can't shut the whole subway for 6 months and do the work in that fashion. We are getting on with building transit. The first day after I was elected, I went to see Andy Byford. I wasn't even sworn into office, but I went to see 2 or 3 of the key people that I would be working with. And Andy Byford told me what a horrible mess the Toronto, York University, Spadina, Vaughan subway extension was in. It was way over budget. Seemingly the budget was out of control. The project was in management chaos. And he sought my support for a plan that we would bring about that made radical changes to how that was being done, brought in some new people to help get it finished. And that day, I would have told you there was a 0% chance that that subway would be open, as it will be in December of this year. But that will make a historic difference. The first subway extension we've opened in 15 years. And that is something I'm proud of as there, because it's going to be open, but I'm ashamed of it as well. Because the notion that we should open for the first time in 15 years a subway extension is not acceptable in the context of keeping up, as I said at the beginning of my remarks, with the pace of growth that's taking place in the city. And finally, there's things we've done like to bring in the balanced and effective. And I say effective because people around the globe are coming to Toronto now and are seeking out our officials to figure out how we achieved a reasonably peaceful, in the end, regulation of services like Uber. I was not prepared, and I was not prepared both because I thought it wasn't the right thing to do, but I thought it also didn't send the right signal about our city to say, well, our answer to that is to try and turn back the hands of time and try and ban that technology and ban the choice that it offered for people getting around the city from our city. And there are cities to this day that don't have Uber because they've banned it. And what we did, went through a period of some turmoil, but we've ended up at the other end with a regulatory scheme that people come from around the world to see how we did it. And what we did there, and nothing's perfect, but we've achieved a lesser degree of regulation on the cab industry while still maintaining safety standards and those kinds of reduced taxi fares, and a place for Uber in the competitive marketplace with fairer regulations as between the two elements of the transportation industry. And hundreds of thousands of people are using both taxis and Uber. And they coexist here as well they should in the 21st century. So that comes to the fact that these things don't happen without controversy. That one didn't. I can assure you it was It was a heartwarming experience for me to have 1,000 cab drivers outside my office. And I sit in my office with the curtains open. Some of my predecessors have had the curtains closed. And I keep them open because I want people to, I want to be able to see what's going on in the wonderful square that I look at from my office. But I also want people to know that I'm there and that I'm accessible to them and that I'm at work on the job. I can assure you, having 1,000 cab drivers standing outside your office saying things I can't repeat at a family function like this is not the most gratifying experience in life, but it's one of those things you just have to go through that. And we're not experiencing that right now, but I do want to just spend a minute with you on King Street, because you've read about it in the newspaper and you've heard about it. But we have a situation on King Street now where nobody I have met tells me that street is working properly. Transit riders don't, people who are walking don't, people who are driving don't, people who are cycling don't. Nobody's happy with it. And so when you find something that's nobody's happy with and that's not working properly, you have to do something about it. And you have a situation today where pedestrians can walk faster than streetcars. There's a major inducement to go on public transit, that you can walk faster than the streetcar goes. You have streetcars sitting behind cars, and you have cars sitting behind streetcars. And so when you look at the pure math, and I came most recently from business. Well, I did an intervening series as a talk show host, but that's another thing. That was almost fun. But it was work, but it was fun. But as a business leader, you look at the numbers, and the numbers say 65,000 people use the King streetcar every day, the third busiest transit route in this city, including the subways. One of the busiest surface transit routes in North America. 65,000 people. 20,000 people use cars. And so if you look at this and you say, well, all right, if you are trying to make things work better, what are you going to prioritize? You are going to prioritize the transit and have it move better and make sure that what you don't end up with is streetcars traveling slower than pedestrians and that traffic and streetcars are interfering with each other to the point where neither can really get anywhere. So we have to speed up the transit. I don't know why anybody would use it if we don't. For those who say, because I often am confronted by the answer, who say, well, why don't you just get rid of the streetcars? They're an antiquated means and nostalgic and so on. That's actually not true. There is a nostalgia for streetcars because we've had them for a long time in the city. But the fact is, to replace streetcars and provide equivalent capacity to move people, the number of people I talked about, you would have to have 2.5 buses for every streetcar. And 2.5 buses come with not only the need to buy all the buses, but also the need to have operators to run those buses, and a bus garage to house them, which we don't, presently have. And so you're looking at an expenditure of millions upon millions, tens and tens and tens of millions of dollars. In fact, it goes to hundreds in order to make that switch, if that was something that was deemed desirable. And I can only tell you, I rely on the expertise of the people at the TTC who say that that is not the right thing to do. The right thing to do is to find ways to get the transit moving better. And so we're going to have a pilot project, and the pilot project is going to involve some change in behavior for people. And it is going to be a change that doesn't ban cars from King Street, but does make a substantial difference in how cars are able to use King Street, where they won't be able to use it, by and large, between Bathurst and Jarvis Street as a thoroughfare. It is going to discourage that from happening. There are going to be special arrangements put in place for deliveries and for wheel-trans vehicles, and there'll be arrangements for increased numbers of cab stands, and we're going to consider whether or not the cab industry have been properly treated in terms of the consultation that's been done to make all of this work. Will this be disruptive during the pilot project period? Quite possibly. In fact, quite probably, because change is disruptive. Nobody likes change. But if you ask me as the mayor of the city whether I have an obligation to try these things in the 21st century when we have this huge challenge posed by the growth that we've had, which is a sign of great confidence in our city, the growth that we've had, and the fact that we're not moving people properly in one of the busiest corridors of the city that many of you, either work in or live in or both, I would say I don't opt for the old option. The old option was to do nothing. You say, well, that's a problem, and maybe we could sort of tinker with it and hope things, hope for the best. I can't accept that approach, and I can't accept it with respect to infrastructure either. So that's why we're building new water mains and building the sewers. I mean, you would hear the reports about the water mains breaking, and they break in part because of our climate, but they also break because they're old. And because people in past administrations have sort of said, if we replace that water main, it's expensive, and it's going to take time, and it's going to be disruptive, so why don't we just, put it off to another day. We're not doing that anymore. We are now, trying not to do that anyway. We're trying to speed these things up, get this work done, and it causes disruption. We're also trying to confront change when we have to, in terms of saying, well, the status quo is not an option, tinkering is not an option, hoping for the best is not an option, and so we're moving forward with that, and we're trying to think bigger. I'm not satisfied with the efforts we've made, notwithstanding that I might sound satisfied by listing even some of the things we've done to you today. And that is why coming this fall, we have to do better, and we're going to be announcing things that are better and that are, I think, consistent with the 21st century. We are more and more data, which we in turn put into all of our different systems and sites so that you too can access that data in terms of being able to do what a lot of you do already, which is use applications that are available today to allow yourself to move around the city in